The speaker today we all came to listen to, Kevin Morris with the FAA. The only one thing I found, and we talked a little bit, there is a Delta pilot with the same name that he's worked with. So if you go out on Google and you're wondering why this guy doesn't look like the other one, that's the reason. So anyway, I'll give you Kevin Morris, he can do his introduction and talk.
All right, thanks.
By the way, we'll hold Q&A till the end, so write down your questions.
I appreciate it, Dave, thanks. First and foremost, anybody been down Alpine slides? I have. That's what happened to me. I'm not a Chernobyl survivor. This is what happens when skin meets concrete at 20 miles an hour. I saved my kid. He was on my lap. At any rate, so I apologize for kind of like hard here.
You lost it at the hop, right?
It right after the hop.
Okay.
Right after the hop. Yeah, he went off and I grabbed him, pulled him up, and we rode down on my arm for a little while. Good times. Again, my name is Kevin Morris. I've been with the Federal Aviation Administration now for 9 years. Back up a little bit on my history. I went up to St. Cloud State University, got all my pilot ratings and flight instructor ratings up there, and I taught people how to fly in the Twin Cities metro area for a couple of years, where I was hired by a company called Masava Airlines. They're no longer in existence, but we flew a few different aircraft, and I was with them as a first officer and then later on a captain. And after I left Masava Airlines, I worked for a software company a little bit in Burnsville called Aerosim Technologies. And now I'm over with the FAA. So originally when I jumped on the FAA, I was an air carrier inspector, meaning I went and looked at Sun Country Airlines and Delta Airlines and a few different major airlines. And then I became a general aviation aircraft accident investigator. So for the past, well, I can't really say that anymore, but for 3 years prior to my current job, I took care of all the airplane crashes in Minnesota, Wisconsin, kind of around the 5-state area. So if it crashed, I was there. I learned a lot about accident investigation. Nobody's born as a great accident investigator, but fortunately, airplanes don't crash all the time. And so during my downtime, one of the roles that was given to me as part of my other duties as assigned in the FAA was become an unmanned aircraft systems specialist. Now, I have to put it out there, I do not own one. I don't fly them. In terms of the operational aspect of them, I am not the expert. However, I am an expert on the rules, our requirements, what it takes to operate commercially, and what you're going to be subject to if you want to do this for a business. So if you want to ask me about what it's like to fly under a bridge, I don't have information. But if you want to ask me what does it take so I can fly my UAS under a bridge and make money, I can get you that information. So hopefully I don't crush too many dreams in this room. There's a lot of you and there's one of me. I'm standing close to the door. I will go quickly. But my plan is here to talk for about 30 minutes, go through some slides, and when I get done with that, I will stick around as long as anybody has any questions. All right, so the majority of what I want to talk about today is part 107. Can anybody see this slides okay? All right, is my voice all right? I'm not Mike, but my wife says I talk really loud anyway. So a little bit, why were we even involved at the FAA? I mean, these things are toys, they're hobbyists, so why does the FAA even care? We'll talk about the registration process, what it takes to be a hobbyist, which most of you, from what I gathered when your introductions, are not too concerned with. Most of you guys want to know about 14 CFR Part 107, which is civil operations. That's, in our discussion, will be synonymous with commercial operations. So civil and commercial are kind of interchangeable for our discussion. What it takes to get a remote pilot certificate, our Before You Fly app. Was anybody downloaded and used that? I'm sorry, I didn't design it. But we have our Before You Fly app out, and then question and answers at the end. So okay, why am I even here? Why is the FAA even get involved in this thing? Well, this goes back to a lawsuit against a particular individual named Perker. He bought a UAS and went out to the University of Virginia, flew it around the University of Virginia, did all sorts of really neat looking things. Admittedly, he was coming right down Main Street underneath sky blocks and looping around and circling around a helipad, and the FAA went, whoa, whoa, whoa. This isn't model aircraft operations. You did this because somebody hired you to take these videos and photos. And so we charged him with violating a whole bunch of different FAA regulations, and Mr. Perker said, this is my hobby. I'm flying a toy. This isn't an airplane. It's a little remote control thing with the battery in it. What authority do you have? So the highly publicized lower court ruling we lost, which is we were fining him for violating all sorts of federal aviation regulations. We lost. FAA doesn't like to lose. So we took that case all the way to the NTSB. Now, for those of you that might not be familiar how the NTSB works in government affairs, they are an independent organization. They're not underneath the Department of Homeland Security. They're not part of the Department of Transportation. or education. They are an individual group, and they're that way because they need to be an independent arbiter. So we appealed that case to the NTSB. Not that he violated the regulations, but we appealed the case that what he was doing was operating an aircraft, and they agreed with us. So they ruled that absolutely, the FAA has always maintained, and it's true, we agree with the FAA, that this is an aircraft. It's not a toy, it's not a little hobby thing, it's not something you're doing for fun, but you're operating an aircraft in the National Airspace System. So you can find this ruling if you just look up NTSB, PIRKER, P-I-R-K-E-R. But what they said is, hey, this thing is an aircraft. We have to look no further than some of the language up here. I'll skip it, but they'll say an aircraft is any device used for flight in the air. It includes any aircraft, manned or unmanned, large and small. So that's where the FAA gets our authority. We've always maintained we had the authority, but it took an NTSB court ruling to say, yes, the FAA has authority to regulate aircraft. So that's where that comes from. Therefore, every one of you who's flying UAS is a pilot. Just like me. I hold an airline transport pilot certificate. You guys are all UAS pilots. And so when the FAA came out with Part 107, and you'll see this, we struggled a little bit. Do we call these people operators or do we call them pilots? And finally we came to our senses and said, wait a minute, they're flying aircraft. Aircraft are flown by pilots. So when Part 107 goes effective, you guys will be all remote pilots, according to the FAA. So that's kind of a key piece to remember. So if you don't take away anything from my discussion here today, remember that you are a pilot and you are flying an aircraft in the National Airspace System. Those are all facts, and I want everybody to make sure we understand that. I know we do things for hobby, I know some people are doing it for business, but in the end, you're taking aircraft up in the atmosphere and you're flying it under FAA regulations.
Is there a size limit on that?
Yes, and I'll get to that, yep. So, what is a UAS, okay? What we define as UAS in Part 107.3 is anything weighing less than 55 pounds on takeoff, including anything you attach to it. You cannot have a 55-pound or 54-pound UAS and attach a 100-pound weight to it of some sort of delivery package. It's combined total weight. When that thing lifts off at takeoff, it has to be less than 55 pounds. So that one doesn't qualify in the bottom right. We still allow those to fly, but they have different rules, and you have to be certified by a couple different organizations. The AMA is one that's probably most well-known. But we're saying it's an aircraft operated without the possibility of human interaction via within or on the aircraft. That's unmanned aircraft. So it's something that you're controlling, and you can't do it within or on board the device. That's how we define UAS for Part 107. Part 107 is civil, i.e. commercial operations. So we require registration. Now this is broad scale. Whether you're a hobbyist or whether you're a commercial operator, you must register a UAS. We have our website set up. Has anybody done this? Anybody go through the website? Easy, difficult? Easy.
Okay.
Cost is what, $5, I think? Not the end of the world with it, but you do have to register it, and that's part of 107.3. We reference section 91.203. And is anybody really familiar and read through FAA regulations before? Okay, again, I'm sorry, but if you need to get to sleep at night, start there. What you'll find is that we'll say, no person may, except for 91.203 A, C, D, E, and 43.2, and so it's like you're jumping back and forth through the book. They're written by lawyers, and that's how the rules are written. So 91.203 talks about any aircraft must have a valid registration. So yes, under Part 107, you need to have the aircraft registered, and there it is, 91.203A2 says you have to have an effective U.S. registration certificate issued to its owner. We issue that at the FAA. So whether you do it via paper or whether you do it online, we take care of that. But somebody will always say, but I'm a hobby operator, I'm not doing Part 107. Don't worry, we've ruined your life as well. So all small unmanned aircraft system for hobby operation, between 0.55 and 55 pounds must be registered. So we register both operating commercially, civilly, and we register for operating as a hobbyist. And the key thing to remember with UAS operations, you have to be in one of those pipelines. You can't be having your feet in both pools. You can't be sort of hobby and sort of Part 107. You are either a hobbyist following all the requirements, or you are a civil operator. You're a civil operator following Part 107 or public use. But most people are not public use, so I'm not going to delve into that too much. But to register, you have to be at least 13 years old, or have somebody register it for you, and you have to be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. So we do it based on size. If it weighs less than 55 pounds, you may register it online. And some people have done it in here. If it weighs more than 55 pounds, or you're going to operate outside the U.S., or it's owned by a trustee of some sort, then you must register it by paper. And you can't download that form because we use carbon paper, because that's the latest and greatest technology we have at the FAA. I'm surprised we don't have microfiche, believe me. But you have to come into our office and pick up those forms. And usually we'll give you 2 or 3 in case you're like me and you make a mistake on one. But the cost is $5 as triannually. So every 3 years, you're going to have to cough up $5 to Uncle Sam to keep your registration active. You can do it on registermyuas.faa.gov. You're going to need a valid email address, a credit or debit card, and a physical mailing address. Why? We're not trying to spy on you. We're not stalking your house. But as rules change, as issues come up, we need to have a way to disseminate this information to the UAS community quick. This is nothing new than what we do with aircraft owners for manned aircraft. We require the same information. It's not a special thing for UAS. I understand some people don't want the government knowing where they live. Unfortunately, that's where we're at right now. Paperwork, whether you do it at the Flight Standards District Office, you're going to need to pay by check, because you can't do it electronically if you're doing it by paper. And you'll still need to provide a mailing address, things of that nature. Although you won't need to provide an email address with that one.
Is this the aircraft or the person?
This is the aircraft. Aircraft registration. We haven't got to the pilot. Pilots don't really have to register. We'll get them certified. So I'll get to that.
Do you cover the custom build here? Do you cover if it's not manufactured by a...
If it's not a manufacturer, if you built it your own, there's no difference. If it's a small UAS.
No special certification required?
Yeah, there are some special airworthiness certificates that we issue, but that's really
way
out there, and I'm going to try to keep it general.
Yeah.
But yeah, we certainly do a little bit of that, because some people do manufacture their own. But if you build an unmanned aircraft system, you need to register it if it weighs over 0.55 pounds or less than 50 pounds. I'm going to keep moving here, so we try to get this question done. Yeah, can you hold? Is that okay? Okay, all right, perfect. Okay. All right, thanks, guys. Dave's making me do it. It's not me. So what do we get? Hobby, recreation. If you're doing this as a hobbyist, again, most people, from what I understand, the background in here probably doesn't apply, but you're going to register one thing, and you sort of register yourself. Sort of. But you will get one certificate. You will get a registration number that must be attached to every single one of your small UAS. Hobby only. You'll get one registration card, and that number will be written on every single UAS you own, 10, 15, 20. If you're commercial, you're going to need one card for each UAS. So if you happen to own 1 or 5 or 10 UAS, part of your commercial operation, you will need to have each one of those UAS registered. And each one will get its own unique number that you'll have to attach to it. And what do I mean by attaching to it? We have a lot of different ways, as long as we can read it. The permanent marker, label, engraving, anything that you can do to make sure that that registration is on the vehicle itself. If you've got a lot of guys, when I talk about registering small UAS, I'm still talking about the model airplane community. A lot of people have invested a lot of time and energy to make replica World War II airplanes that they don't want to have this big, dumb FAA number on the side. Okay, we get it. If you have a compartment that you can access without any special tools, you can put it inside there. The idea is, if you go out and something happens and you decide, I don't want to get caught and drive away, and somebody finds a piece of your records and they can identify with that number, then we know who you are. So the age-old question is, well, if people are going to go do dumb things, they're not going to register. You're right, they're not. I understand that too. But that's kind of the rules for marking it. You can mark it any way as long as it can be read, it's permanent, and you can get to it without a special tool. I don't want to have a special screwdriver tip to open up a compartment to find out where it is. So one last thing about hobby operations. We don't have a whole lot of rules outright about them. We recognize hobby operations like we have for many, many, many years. In fact, back in 1980, we issued our first advisory circular on model aircraft operations. And here's what you need to do. It was kind of a gentleman's agreement. Hey, you're still operating a UAS or an aircraft like we think today. You were still operating an aircraft, but we understand you're a little remote control airplane, you're staying away from airports, we're not going to make you get a pilot certificate. At that time, we weren't going to make you register. Of course, all that's changed now. But Congress came out in our Reauthorization Act, which is another thing if you're having trouble falling asleep. Read through public law. $112.95. Section 336 is the hobby portion of it. They made the rules. We cannot change the rules. Congress is God. FAA makes rules based on what Congress tells us to do. And Congress said, hey, as long as they're flying for hobby or recreational use only, as long as they're following a nationally recognized safety code, at the time it was written, most people thought the Academy of Model Aeronautics, as long as you are weighing less than 55 pounds and not operating closer than 5 miles to an airport without notification, you're good. You don't need a pilot certificate. You're a hobby recreational use person. And those rules are still there today. In fact, they're actually incorporated into Part 107 as part of the rule. Now, let's get to the stuff you guys all really care about. Part 107. Thing to remember is this doesn't exist now. It exists August 29th and not a minute sooner. If you really want the number, it's midnight Eastern Standard, Eastern Daylight Time, or whatever. Midnight, August 29th is when that rule goes into effect. You may not operate under Part 107 until you meet the requirements of the pilot certificate. So don't think that you can start your business August 29th. You most likely won't be able to do that unless you're holding a 333, which if that's the case, you're already doing commercial operations. So,
Kevin, you want some water?
no, I'm good. Do I sound bad?
No, you look like you were looking for some water.
No, I was just lost. I didn't want to get to the table. I'm not going to cover every rule in Part 107 because we'll be here tomorrow or wherever, next week. But I'm going to cover some of the big ones. And hopefully you guys can still see that. So, applicability. This is what I'm talking about. Part 101 actually talks about model aircraft. We already talked about there's nothing new in here that we have for model aircraft use, but that's actually incorporated into our rules now. Okay, the next one here is a big one, accident reporting. If you have an accident with your small UAS while operating under Part 107, you must report it. So keep in mind, these slides I'm going to show you now all have to deal with Part 107, which is civil, commercial, UAS operation, which most people in this room will probably want to operate under. We define an accident as serious injury to any person or loss of consciousness or damage to any property exceeding $500. If you have an event like that, you must report it to the FAA within 10 days. That is a requirement that's unique to unmanned aircraft. We don't have that requirement for manned aircraft. You can crash your airplane that you were flying and you never have to tell the FAA. You're going to have to tell the NTSB. Usually we'll find out about it one way or the other. But for UAS, we have a special rule for you guys that says if you crash and you do damage to person or property, you do need to report within 10 days to the FAA. So keep that in mind. Why are we doing that? Why do we care? Because we don't have a history. The one thing that the FAA does with rulemaking is they use it based on history. We just don't have a history with small unmanned aircraft systems operating commercially. We don't. We're trying to build that history. You're going to need a remote pilot certificate. Who's going to need it? Anybody manipulating the flight controls of a small UAS. Keep in mind, this is all under Part 107, so we're not talking hobby anymore at all. This is commercial ops. All right, you must hold a UAS pilot certificate or be supervised by someone who holds a UAS pilot certificate that has the ability to immediately take control. Think of that in a training environment. You're training somebody to use a UAS, you're standing right next to them, or maybe you have dual controls and you can swap the command link between the two of them. The person you're training doesn't necessarily want you to have a small UAS pilot certificate. If you do, and you have the ability to take control of that UAS immediately. So that's who's going to need to have a small UAS pilot certificate. Medically speaking, right, you may not manipulate the controls, you may not fly UAS, you may not act as a remote pilot in command if you have, or if you know or have reason to know that you have a physical or mental condition which would interfere with the operation. So if you had a concussion and you have some brain issues, or you just had a heart attack or you're on a bunch of medication, you have to comply with 107.17, which means that you have to sort of self-certify and be like, am I okay to operate this thing safely? The key is the FAA wants to protect things that are in the air and people on the ground from things that are in the air. And we don't want any issues. If you have all of a sudden fainting spells all week long, that may not be the week to go out and do your commercial operation over the highway. We don't want to have people hurt. So your remote pilot in command must be designated for each flight. So there's a difference between being a pilot in command and having a pilot certificate. A lot of people have pilot certificates. Any airliner you get on right now, the two guys or two girls sitting in the front have pilot certificates, both of them. only one is the pilot in command. That's kind of the captain of the ship. When things go wrong, that's where people are going to look to. So before each flight, somebody has to be designated as remote pilot in command. Now, generally speaking, when you're flying your UAS mission, it's probably just you or just their pilot. You're going to be that person. But if you're doing a training event, or you're flying, you got two people with certificates, and you're operating the same drone, and you're trying to do a link system around, one of you's got to be the pilot in command for that flight. So if something happens with that UAS and it decides to go off in a direction you didn't want it to go and it crashes into the playground, somebody has to have responsibility for that. The FAA requires one person, and only one person for that. So you have to have your remote pilot in command designated before each flight. They're final authority for the safe operation. They ensure that the UAS doesn't pose any undue hazard, and they ensure compliance with all applicable rules. The pilot in command is the captain of that mission. Even if you have two certified pilots, you only have one pilot in command. You may not operate in a hazardous, careless, reckless manner. You can't endanger the life or property of the other. We have the same rule for manned aircraft. If you're out there and you're doing something that's just reckless, even though it meets, let's say, every other rule in Part 107, you may not meet this rule. So always keep that in mind. Is what I'm doing safe? Is what I'm doing okay? Am I taking any unnecessary risks? Because if so, then you need to mitigate those risks. You don't want to be operating careless or reckless. You cannot be dropping things from a UAS unless it creates no undue hazard to persons or property. So if you're going to drop something, you have to take all the risk mitigation tools available to ensure that it's not going to hurt nobody if you're going to drop something from a UAS. Moving vehicles. You may not operate from a moving vehicle, whether it's a car or an aircraft, from a moving land or waterborne vehicle unless, okay, this is the kind of caveat we put in there, the UAS is flown over a sparsely populated area and is not transporting another person's property for compensation or for hire. So generally speaking, under Part 107, you're not going to be operating from a moving vehicle, a boat, and certainly not an aircraft, but no boats, no cars, unless you're in a very sparsely populated area. Then we do allow for it. It depends on what your mission is, keeping in mind that you can't use that to carry a product to be dropped off somewhere. It's not meant to be a delivery system. All right, alcohol and drugs. Pretty self-explanatory, 9117 and 9119, you cannot act as a crew member, which means you cannot be the remote pilot in command of a UAS if you've had an alcoholic beverage within 8 hours of your mission start time. So when that UAS lifts off the ground, you have to be able to look back and say, I have not had an alcoholic beverage for 8 hours. It's the same for manned aircraft. In fact, these rules here are manned aircraft rules. We just referenced them, and I dropped them in there. You may not operate under the influence of alcohol or using any drug that affects your faculties in any way that's contrary to safety, and you have to have at least less than 0.04 blood alcohol content. So what is driving here? 0.08 now? You got to be half of that to act as a crew member of a UAS. And that's the same for manned aircraft. Same way. You have to operate during daylight or no later than civil twilight, which is like the half hour after civil sunset or the half hour after official or before civil sunrise. And then if you're going to do that, you have to have some special lighting on board the UAS. But you're not allowed to operate at night. No nighttime operations. You're not allowed to operate multiple UASs. You can't have a fleet of them doing your work. One remote pilot in command, one UAS. Visual line of sight. You must operate within visual line of sight. And what we say is that you have to know the unmanned aircraft's location. You have to be able to determine its altitude, attitude, and direction of flight. You have to be able to observe the airspace or other air traffic or hazards and ensure that it doesn't endanger the life of another. Visual line of sight. You cannot operate behind a building. You cannot operate under a bridge if at any time you're going to lose visual sight of that UAS. You have to have visual sight, and it's going to be no first-person view. It has to be, I look up, and it's right there. Okay, so we do allow for visual observers to help, but not to form like a daisy chain. Remember, the remote pilot in command always has to have visual line of sight of the UA at all times. You can use a visual observer to help you in case you're looking down, you're planning something, you don't have to be constantly, they can watch the UAS for you as long as they have a direct line of communication to you, unaided by electronics. No walkie-talkies, no cell phones, they have to be able to say, hey, stop! They have to be able to let you know right away. And you have to be able to look up and see it. So that's the implement of a visual observer. We have some rules there to help you maintain a safe operation. A lot of times when it's very precision, you're looking down at an iPad or a computer screen. That's okay. Technically, you don't have visual line of sight on the vehicle, but if you have a visual observer, you can still fly. You don't have to stop every time you look down. You may not operate over human beings, directly over human beings. Oh, I should phrase that. Unless they are participating in your mission. Okay? Located under a covered structure or inside a stationary vehicle that can provide reasonable protection from a falling UAS is okay. So if somebody was flying a UAS over the top of this building right now and they had the authority to do that, that wouldn't be considered operating over human beings. Think of marathons, parks, weddings, outside concerts, things like that. You can't drive your UAS over the top of the crowd, which people do, I know, I've seen the videos too. But you cannot operate over the top of human, directly over the top of human. What does directly mean? To me, it means straight over the top. So if you had a massive failure of your rotor system or the battery died right then and there, and it came straight down, if you hit somebody in the head, that would be over somebody. If you're off to the side, maybe not. But again, you as the remote pilot in command are the one to determine that. What's safe, what's not safe, what's added to risk, what's unnecessary to risk. You have to be that person that determines that. We have a lot of airspace restrictions. Who has 333 exemption right now? Okay. You're going to find Part 107 is far more liberal in terms of operating in airspace. You know, you have to have a COA to do all this stuff, and you're not going to need that with Part 107. But we're going to say Class B, C, or D airspace, and if what I just said seems strange to you, you better start reading your books if you want to pass the UAS test coming up here in a few weeks. But B, C, and D airspace, or within lateral of E, you must receive permission from air traffic control. Just like any manned aircraft. I cannot fly my manned aircraft into flying cloud without getting permission from tower. You cannot fly your unmanned aircraft into flying cloud's airspace without permission from the tower. Pretty plain and simple. So here's some operating limitations. 87 knots or 100 mile an hour ground speed, that's the maximum. You cannot fly your UAS under Part 107 faster than 100 miles an hour ground speed. Altitude cannot be higher than 400 feet above ground level. That's the AGL portion of it. Unless you're within 400-foot radius of a structure. I want everybody to think of a radio antenna right now, big 2,000-foot tall tower, and you're not going to operate 400 feet higher than the top of that. This was huge to me because I was really glad to see this in there because so many people are like, I'm 10 feet from the building, there should be no airplane there, why can't I? So I was really glad to see this in there. So as long as you're within 400 feet of a structure and a radius, and you don't operate higher than 400 feet above the top of that structure, you can go above 400 feet AGL. I think this was specifically written for a lot of the open country radio antennas that are 2,300 feet tall. Now they can take a UAS, go right up to 2,700 feet, really, and take a look at that tower. So those are the key things to remember if you're going to be above 400 feet. If you're not going to be within 400 feet of the structure, then you have to be below 400 feet AGL. Flight visibility must be no less than 3 miles. 3 miles flight visibility. And that we define flight visibility. I'm not going to read that to you. Again, this is all in the rules, all in the regulation. But you have to have at least 3 miles flight visibility. If anybody has got a pilot certificate here, you're starting to think of VFR weather. And again, if that doesn't mean anything to you, start studying for your test. You're going to be unhappy come August 29th. But cloud distances. You may not operate 500 feet, closer than 500 feet below a cloud or within 2,000 feet horizontal. Now, for manned pilots, we have above cloud restrictions, but you can't fly UAS above cloud because you couldn't see it. So 500 feet below or at least 2,000 feet to the side of a cloud. How you figure that out, I don't know. I've been flying a long time and I can't tell you, I can't look out the window right now and tell you how high those clouds are. But anyway. So to be a remote pilot, you have to be at least 16 years old, be able to read, speak, write, understand the English language, know or have reason to know that you have a physical or mental condition that would interfere, and you have to demonstrate aeronautical knowledge. This is the piece that everybody's getting geared up for right now, is this aeronautical knowledge piece. So what are we talking about? You're going to need to pass an initial aeronautical knowledge test for UAS, unless you hold a current Part 61 pilot certificate. That's light sport, recreational sport pilot, private pilot, commercial pilot, ATP, airline transport pilot. Student pilot doesn't count. So if you are not one of those certificated airmen that the FAA recognizes, you will need to pass this initial aeronautical test. It's going to cover a lot of things. I'll talk about it here on the next slide. not the next slide apparently, but the slide after. But you're going to have recency of experience. Just like a manned pilot, every 2 years, every 24 calendar months, a UAS pilot must take and pass a recurrent UAS pilot knowledge test. And you're going to have to show those results. If any FAA inspector like myself walks up and says, hey, how are you authorized to do this flight? Well, I'm current, here's my most recent knowledge test. Or if you're a pilot, here's my most recent flight review, things like that nature. We have regulations subject to waiver. You can get a waiver for operating from a moving vehicle. What does a waiver mean? That means you can operate from a moving vehicle, whereas most people can't. You have to submit this individually to the FAA. You can get a waiver for daylight operation, meaning you could fly your UAS at night, commercially, if you have the waiver. Visual line of sight. You may get a waiver for operating beyond visual line of sight, commercially. You have to apply. Visual observer, you can get a waiver for that. You can get a waiver for operating multiple small UAS at the same time. You can get a waiver, I don't know why, but you can get a waiver from yielding the right of way to manned aircraft. You can get a waiver for operating over people, operating in specific types of airspace. You can get a waiver for operating limitations. If you want to do 150 miles an hour, you can get a waiver for that. Waivers are good generally from a day or 2 days to 2 years. It really depends on what you're trying to do and what you can demonstrate to the FAA as, hey, I'm going to ensure an equal level of safety to your regulations through this waiver. I'm asking you to operate directly over people, but here's why I'm going to assure nothing bad is going to happen. And you can submit that to your local flight standards district office where I work, which is right by the airport. They'll review it and they'll either approve or deny your waiver. You can get a waiver for all these things. So just because the rule says you can't, doesn't mean you can't get a waiver for some of them.
You get a waiver from the waiver?
Yeah, can't get a waiver from the waiver.
Don't take my name down.
Yeah, no, that's right. He's recording it, not me.
That's right.
Just because you made your registration with the state or with the FAA doesn't mean you're good with the state of Minnesota. They want their piece of the pie too, and their piece of the pie costs more than our piece of the pie. We're $5. Anybody register with the state? What's it cost to do all that?
Sales tax is 7%. If you bought it in the state of Minnesota, and then you'll pay another about $90 to $100 per aircraft for commercial operations, and then $30 for commercial operations license, which to get that you have to have liability insurance, all to do commercial, to do work for hire for someone else in the state of Minnesota. Per
Yeah.
aircraft is sales tax, $100, and operators.
So $5 don't sound so bad right now in 3 years a month,
Could
right?
you repeat that?
Yeah, it's there's a cost to register for your commercial license, which was about $30. There is a cost to register each UAS, which was somewhere around
About 100.
about 100, and then you have to carry liability insurance
And sales tax.
and sales tax to go with that. We do not require insurance at the FAA. You can fly your UAS without insurance. We don't necessarily care. We don't enforce those regulations. We have no regulations to enforce with that, but the state of Minnesota does. I pretty much guarantee you most other states will too. If they don't now, they will soon. Same thing with privacy. We don't deal with privacy laws. You want to hover outside your neighbor's bedroom window, that's your local sheriff's problem. Don't call me, I can't help you. But certainly the state of Minnesota or your local state will be concerned with that. All right, so what is this remote pilot certificate? Here's how to earn it. First-time pilots, which is probably the majority of folks in this room, you're going to need to schedule an appointment with the Knowledge Testing Center. Where are those? There's a bunch of them around the Twin Cities. I think there's maybe one in Rod, maybe Mankato, and another up by Duluth. We have this information on our website, which one of my very last slides will be where you can go to find this information. But you're going to have to schedule an appointment. If you haven't done that now, and you're one of these go-getters and you want to get this thing rocking and rolling as quickly as you can after August 29th, you better call now to schedule that. Because anybody have their schedule? 1, 2, people are scheduling
They're
it.
full.
Okay.
The 29th at Flying
The
Club.
29th are full at Flying Club. There are other places to do it, but if you want to be on the front wave of this and you want to have that knowledge test done on August 29th, schedule it now. Start scheduling it now.
It's hard, by the way, the test is hard. It's no gimme.
No. Well, and I've actually got some quiz questions for you guys. We'll see how sharp you guys are. You're going to need to pass that initial knowledge test. Then you're going to have to complete FAA Form 80. Okay, this form here is your pilot certificate application. You're going to complete that form. It's going to go to Oklahoma City, where we have our aircraft, airmen, and repository systems all down there. It's going to get vetted by the TSA. As soon as you're vetted by the TSA, you'll get an email directing you back to the online application for your pilot certificate, and you can print out a temporary card. You're not going to have to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get your card. But the key is that TSA approval. You're going to have to go through their system, Homeland Security. All right, a permanent card will be mailed probably 2 or 3 weeks. I'm guessing 7 to 8 weeks after we get the initial surge of everybody applying. So that email, when you get back and you can log in and just print the temporary, that'll be key. As soon as you get that temporary certificate, go forth and make money under Part 107. So here's the knowledge test areas, which I thought was a bunch of slides earlier, but thinking I wrote this PowerPoint, I didn't know where it is. You're going to be quizzed on regulations relating to UAS, privileges, limitations, flight operations, airspace, aviation weather, aircraft loading and performance, emergency procedures, crew resource management, radio communication, determining performance, physiological effects of drug and alcohol, aeronautical decision making, airport operations, maintenance of pre-flight. So don't think that just because you read Part 107 and you've been flying a UAS for a long time, you're going to walk in and ace that. I can all but guarantee if you have not studied what we're putting out there, if you have not studied for this thing, you'll walk in, you'll pay 100 or 150 bucks, whatever they want to charge for this, and you'll come out with a failed report. And you're going to have to wait 14 days to take it again. Again, if you want to be on the leading edge of this, you're going to need to start studying, you need to book the exam, because I think we're going to have a lot of unhappy people come August 29th that don't realize what this is all about.
It's one thing.
150 bucks. That's a lot of money to blow on a test that you're going to be very upset at when you get through it. So what is this test going to be like? Here's a question. According to 14 CFR 107, the remote pilot command of a small unmanned aircraft planning to operate within Class Charlie airspace. What's the answer? You know what?
C.
C. I heard like 2 people say it. All right? We need to study this stuff. You need to get permission from air traffic control. All right? If you're like, what's Class C airspace? You're going to need to study that stuff. When operating an unmanned airplane, the remote pilot should consider that the load factor on the wings may be increased any time. Before you shut out the answer, let everybody read through it. By show of hands, how many say A? I don't care if you're wrong, doesn't matter. How about B? How many are raising their hands since a lot of people raise their hands? Okay, how about C? Okay, answer is B. This is the performance stuff that you're going to need to know. And you're like, why am I being asked this? Because you're a pilot and you're operating an aircraft. Got to remember those 2 things from my first couple slides. When using a small unmanned aircraft in a commercial operation, who is responsible for the briefing of the participants about emergency procedures? Say A, the remote pilot in command. Right. Remember, the remote pilot in command is the final authority. They're the captain. When things go wrong, it falls on their shoulders too. All right, hear about this one. You've received an outlook briefing from flight service through 1-800-WX-BRIEF. The briefing indicates you expect a low level temperature inversion with high relative humidity. What weather conditions would you expect? Smooth air, poor visibility, fog, haze, or low clouds. Light wind shear, poor visibility, haze, and light rain. Turbulent air, poor visibility, fog, low stratus type clouds, and showery precipitation.
C.
C? Oh, darn it. And this is where I'm like, this stuff seems ridiculous to have to know this, but you're a pilot flying an aircraft. All right, you've been hired as a remote pilot by a local TV news station. Congratulations. To film breaking news with your small UA. You expressed a safety concern, and the station manager has instructed you to fly first, ask questions later. All right, what type of hazardous attitude does this represent?
C.
All the above? No. There's no D. Although if it does say all the above, I usually check it anyway if I don't know. All right, impulsivity. These are hazardous attitudes. These are the physiological and psychological stuff you're going to need to know to be a pilot flying an aircraft. All right, I don't know if you'll be able to see this very well, but you're at the Coeur d'Alene. What frequency should be used as a common traffic advisory frequency to monitor airport traffic? And that's where you're going to look at this map, which you can't see for a darn right now, but you're going to have to be able to find it on there. So you're going to have to know what all these little things mean and which frequency you're going to have to contact them on. 135.075. What's common traffic advisory frequency? I'm going to have you guys look that up. What is the floor of the Savannah Class C airspace at the shelf area, outer circle? Which one is it? A, B. How many say A? How many say B? How many say C? Okay. There's only 3 choices. You can't just opt out of the question, you guys. Right?
I can't see the map.
You can't see it, that's fine. Sure, good answer. Yeah, I can't see the map. There are a lot of questions on reading sectional charts, diagrams, information there you're going to need to know. Okay, well, here's Brainerd. I'll give you guys a hint. That's Brainerd Airport right there. Okay, while monitoring the Brainerd CTAP, you hear an aircraft announce that they are midfield left down runway 16. Right? Where is that airplane relative to that runway? How many would say it's to the east? How many would say it's to the south? How many say it's off to the west? How many are still flying their UAS and have no idea where this airplane is? It just radioed in. Right? Okay, it would be off to the east. Be off to the east. Midfield left downwind, runway 16. This would be runway 16 here. And if they're on midfield left downwind, they're over here. They'd be in this area. All right, so our Before You Fly app. Some people have looked at it. We have available on Android and iOS. Version 2.0 is out. It's just really designed to help you guys figure out, can I fly? Can I not fly? Why can I or why couldn't I? And it does an all right job at that. It's got some features like a status indicator letting you know about your current or planned location of operation. That planner mode can say, I want to fly next Tuesday at this airport or this area. Is there going to be a problem? I don't know. This is off our website. I don't know how informative and interactive it is, but we tried. All right, just remember we tried. The government app, yeah. It does display active TFRs. It does have some links to FAA UAS resources, but it doesn't give you contact information for the airport. That's the struggling part of it. So this is kind of what it looks like on your phone. It'll tell you, hey, you're about to fly, but there's some issues. You're located within 5 miles of the airport. This is the planning screen. I'm going to fly here at this time. Is there going to be an issue? It'll give you the map mode. Tell you where all the airports are around. You click on it, it'll tell you what the airport is, and we don't tell you anything about it or how to contact the airport operator or anything further that would help you out. So people love the app. You can tell we have 1.5 stars. Like I said, we tried. It should get better, but don't hold your breath. It's something we put out there. There's probably far better UAS planning apps out there than ours. Ours is the official one, so that's what I stand behind on that. So I've talked long enough now. A couple things on the question and answer site. Everybody should be familiar with the FAA.gov UAS website. If you're not, go get very familiar with that. We have horrible websites in the government. Most of our websites are actually terrible. This one's not too bad. It's actually maintained. The person that built it is actually a web designer, so it's somewhat useful. The registration website, Academy of Model Aeronautics, they're not the only national recognized organization that has a safety code out there, all right, that you have to follow. We just require that you follow somebody's community-based safety guideline that's recognized nationally, whoever that might be. Advisory Circular 107-2, I'd be very familiar with that. That's something you're going to want to know, 107-2. It kind of gives you some plain language explanation of why we did things or what the heck is a visual observer. It will tell you that. Public Law 11295, subtitle B, is where it talks about a lot of the small unmanned aircraft, where it gives us the authority to make rules, something like that. I would add to this list, if you're going to study for the test, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. That's a lot to swallow, the P-H-A-K, P-HAK, as everybody likes to call it. It's available free on our website. It's a large PDF file, but if you want to pass that test, if you want to know what CTAP is or what the heck left downwind runway 16 means, you're going to want to read through that book, because I guarantee you're going to get asked questions on that written exam. Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. You might be able to find it just by searching FAA P-H-A-K. I think it might be one of the first hits that come up. So that's kind of the end of my chatty presentation. I didn't cover everything in Part 107. I didn't cover everything you need to know, but the advisor circular, the rule, and the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge is where you're going to want to start if you want to pass that test. So I will stick around now as long as you guys want with questions.
Kevin,
Yes. I haven't heard anything about that yet.
right now it's still called the tower.
So right now it would be still called a tower. One thing you could do is buy, and I would recommend this, if you're going to be operating in controlled airspace or air traffic has authority, Class D, Class C, Class B airports in particular, invest in a two-way handheld aviation radio. You are going to want one of those if you're going to operate in there, because if you're able to tell that controller, I'm going to be operating 2 miles north of your runway at 400 feet AGL doing a site inspection, I will be monitoring 118.10 frequency. You can reach me. I've got a handheld. The chances of you getting authorization and clearance from air traffic control just went way up. Went way, way up. Because that's what air traffic is used to. They key their mic, they talk to a pilot, the pilot keys their mic, and they talk back. They want to key their mic and say, UAS operating 2 miles north, how do you copy Flying Cloud Tower? I copy you loud and clear, what's up? Okay, we have an aircraft inbound as an emergency, can you please cease your mission? Yep, no problem, and down you go. That's what they want. If you're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to be operating and I'll have my cell phone on, but I'm doing some filming, so it's got to be on vibrate, I may or may not hear, they'll be like, yeah, you're probably not going to do it. So invest in a two-way handheld aviation radio. I don't think they're too expensive nowadays, and they're plenty powerful enough, and you can tune in every aviation frequency you need. No, other questions? I know aside from yes, sir.
Yeah, Kevin, I have a number of questions.
How's that?
We want to get ramp checked?
We don't define sparsely populated. We focus on operations over densely populated. You're either densely populated or sparsely populated in FAA lingo. So we don't even define densely populated. We really leave it up to the remote piloting command. But I will put this out there. Flying over here, probably densely populated. Flying west of Minnetonka or maybe north of 694 somewhere, sparsely populated. But if you're talking about in terms of I want to be able to operate my UAS from a moving vehicle or a moving boat, it better be pretty darn sparsely populated. But that's probably not something you're going to get a lot of pushback from. I mean, if you say, hey, the area I'm operating is sparsely populated, we're going to trust you as a remote pilot in command. In fact, we probably won't even be out there. Now, if something happens where that sparsely populated area ends up having a high-rise apartment building in it, and that's where the window your UAS goes through, then we're going to show up. We're going to say, why did you think this was sparsely populated on 66th and York? So we're going to want to know. So, yeah.
In terms of the Part 107 certificate of waiver process, is that going to follow the certificate of authorization process in the future?
No. Okay, so the question was, what's kind of the difference between certificate of authorization and certificate of waiver? Certificate of authorization is an air traffic control issued document. It's an authorization from them to operate in airspace they control at a particular time and place. We, on the flight standards side, where I live in the FAA, we do not issue certificates of authorization. We issue certificates of waiver. So we are going to give you relief from a particular part of the regulation. Operating over people or operating at night. You say, hey, I've got a contractor with a local television, or I've contracted with a company, they want to get some night shots of their facility or their plant. You can submit a certificate of waiver to the office here in Minneapolis. We would look at it and say, it looks safe, it looks like everything will be okay. He's requesting it for one mission. We'll give him a week-long waiver, just in case he gets weathered out on the day he wants to do it, and we will send that back to you, generally within about 7 to 10 days. I think we're requesting something like 60 days.
60 to 90?
60 to 90, yeah. We request that for all waiver requests, but I will tell you in practice, they're approved far, far sooner than that. The only problems we run into is when the waiver's not filled out properly, or somebody hasn't demonstrated an equal level of safety or risk management with the operation they want to do. For example, air shows. We issue waivers to air shows all spring long because it's summer air show season. Some people are really good at submitting their waivers. They've done it 10 years in a row. They submit the same one, they change the dates and whatever. We look at it, not the same one as last year, stamp approval, out the door in 3 days. Some people can't figure out how to do it, and they send in, well, you got to show us where the emergency vehicles are. Oh, and then it goes back, and then it comes back. That's why we ask for the 60 to 90 days. On that same note, don't think you could submit it Friday afternoon for your operation on Saturday. That will happen. Yeah.
In terms of ramp check, the FAA is basically saying that we need to keep appropriate documentation.
Documentation to meet the requirements of Part 107. So if you have the fortunate experience of having an FAA guy show up when you're doing your UAS mission, and he says, I'd like to see your documents, he's going to want to see your remote pilot certificate, he's going to want to see that the UAS is registered, and that you're current. So whether that's your initial knowledge test that you passed or your recurrent knowledge test you took after 24 months of operating, that's what we're talking about.
What about maintenance logs?
Maintenance logs are required information for you to keep. but you don't necessarily have to produce that instantaneously. We can say, hey, look, when you get home, scan us some maintenance logs and send it in. We do that with manned aircraft too.
And one final question. My understanding is with visual observer that radio communication.
That authorization has to be
When I read through
on.
it,
I
saying
had the
like-
same understanding.
It was electronic communications were allowed?
I believe radio is allowed. I
Okay,
believe-
they might do that then. I might have misspoke on that.
I think it's
My-
under 107, it's not required, you don't have to have a VO.
Correct, you do not. Yeah, all right, so maybe they're allowing that. The last I saw was no electronic aiding with that, but if they change that, then I might have missed that one, my apologies. Yes?
Do we have to have manuals with a, like a drone 107?
That goes back to the maintenance side. So the maintenance issue, if you buy a UAS and the manufacturer of that UAS says every 50 hours you need to replace rotor blades, whether they need it or not, you have to do that every 50 hours and you have to log that you did that. So that at any point, say the inspector shows up and you've been operating the same UA for 4 years, you just want to see that every 50 hours you change rotor blades per the manufacturer manual. But you don't have to have a duffel bag full of manuals and stuff with you. Really, what we're looking for on a ramp check, which I'd be surprised if you get ramp check. Many pilots that fly manned aircraft have never seen an FAA inspector in their life. We just don't have that many of us. But what we look for on a ramp check is certificates, registration, and currency. Maintenance stuff we can get later.
I would just add to that, I have had occasion where local law enforcement has asked me to ground my aircraft to ask me questions. And they've asked to see my paperwork, or I've suggested that they should ask.
Keep in mind, if you're operating, you're taking off from somewhere, and that somewhere is owned or controlled by somebody. So in the state of Minnesota, you're subject to state of Minnesota rules. When it's on the ground. When you take off, the federal aviation regulations apply. States cannot enforce our federal aviation regulations. They can't come on and say, you didn't have a knowledge test within the past 24 months, therefore I'm confiscating your UAS and I'm taking it back to the station. They can't do that. Just like we can't show up and say, I see you don't have any insurance, so we're going to fine you $1,000. We don't have a rule for that. So we have very separate rules. And I want to make that clear. If law enforcement shows up, and we're doing our very best to educate them, because that's been a struggle too. If they show up and they want you down on the ground now, don't give them the, hey, I'm under FAA rule, because it's not going to work out well for you. Go, just put it down on the ground, find out what they want. There is an education piece with the general public, with you pilots, with the law enforcement, quite frankly, with a lot of FAA inspectors that we're all trying to do. This is happening in government footprint very, very fast. I've never seen a rule published this fast in my entire life. And we're talking an entire section of 107 rules. Normally when you want to change one rule, it takes 6-7 years to change one little rule. We issued 50 different rules for UAS and we did it within like 3.5 years. I mean, it's ridiculous how fast we put those out. So there is a steep learning curve for everyone involved. So I just learned that we can use walkie-talkies. Okay, there are things I need to learn too, but hopefully for the most part I gave you guys good information.
Do you think they'll change, the rules will change over time, or are they
Yes,
going to kind of
absolutely, the rules will change. Yep, absolutely, they'll change. They'll change because we have more data, so we can make them more liberal. Maybe we're going to end up allowing operations at night, or operations from moving vehicles.
Or if they take an airliner down, they could go the other way.
Or they can go the other way. And just like your grade point average in college and high school, it goes up really slow, it'll go down fast. Same with UAS. If we lose an airplane and people are killed, expect new rules fast. If things are going great, we'll get there. We'll loosen something up somewhere maybe. Yes, sir.
But don't you think there's a kind of a line in the sand now between commercial operators and how they're behaving versus hobbyists and how they're behaving? If you're operating on a Port 107 as a whole, they're safe, and you have a hobbyist that, does something unsafe for commercial operators.
I don't think Congress will care.
Yeah, and I had this conversation too. We are a political agency, as much as I can't stand politics. And CNN doesn't care if you were a hobbyist or you're Part 107. You flew that drone through that cockpit window of that small airplane and killed that guy. It's all drones, all drones. And that's where, look, I'll give you an example. Look at the registration requirements. We never required hobbyists to register their model airplanes, their small UASs, ever, until they all start going up and causing problems. And it wasn't the brutal part was, it wasn't the model aircraft community doing it. It was my dad who walked into Radio Shack and bought one of this school. He's flying around in Prairie by Flying Club. They had no idea. So that group of uneducated people sort of ruined it and created this registration requirement for everything. You have to say, okay, fine, stop. Everybody's going to register now. You guys can't keep away from airplanes. Everybody register. Modeling community, rightfully so, was very upset. I think sued us. I think we're still in court fighting that. The commercial side, most people are like, yeah, I get it. It's a cost to do business, a part of the way aviation is. Yeah, definitely there was a rift between the fixed wing model aircraft and drone, and unfortunately when something happens, it's not going to be reported as well as modeler was out doing something. But boy, those 107 guys are safe. You know, it'll be, yeah, drone flew through it. You know, people are going to go, oh my God, we got to do something. Yeah. Yes.
Is a Part 61 pilot a recommending instructor to submit their 80 in the aircraft?
No. But so if you're a Part 61 certified pilot, you have a few different options to submit. You can go through a designated pilot examiner to do that. You can go through an airman certification representative at flight school, or you can go through an FAA inspector, and we can issue your temporary certificate right there. You don't have to wait. If you go through a flight instructor, they do not have the authority to issue temporary certificates, so you'll have to wait a little bit. Somebody's going to have to sign that form for you as a certificated pilot, but you won't need a recommending instructor. You'll just need somebody to say, hey, I vetted this person was current in manned aircraft. I vetted that they have a Part 61 pilot certificate, so I'm signing my name for that. But if they are a flight instructor doing it, they can't issue a temporary, if you come to the FSDO weekend. For those of you who are not Part 61 pilots, nobody needs to sign your submission for your pilot certificate. But you will not get a temporary certificate at all from anyone until TSA vets you. The difference for certificated airmen, they've already been vetted.
So if we have a Part 61 pilot certificate, the best thing is to go to the FSDO with our 87.
Please don't come to FSDO. We don't have many people. It's one option you have. It's one option you have.
You can't.
Yeah. When you come, I'm
I've been
locking
there
doors.
once. I've been there once. I never want to go back.
Oh, hey, it's not that bad.
Well, it takes forever to get called into the building.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Easier. Once 107 hits August 29th and it goes live, you'll probably see people advertising, come on in, you know, for $10, we'll submit we have an ACR or a DPE, I'll do it for $10. Or you could come into the FSDO, just keep in mind that we have limited resources available to handle 4,000 people walking in wanting their UAS pilot certificate.
So I just wanted to ask a quick clarification on Line
So
107.
the slippery slope, and here's how I describe it. This is a great question, I'm glad you asked it. Here's the scenario I give. You're all farmers, you own 150 acres of farmland. You bought a UAS because the things are really cool and they take cool pictures. You take it up, you fly over your farm, you take all these great pictures, you film a couple of cool stuff, you put it up on YouTube so all your friends can see, or put the pictures on Facebook, you maybe hang some on your wall. Probably a hobby right there, recreational use. You're the same farmer, you're the same field, you bought the same UAS. You take it up because you want to see if your crop is dry in a particular area. Nobody's paying you to do it. Nobody's giving you money. You're not advertising it, but you take it up and you're like, hey, that spot's dry. I need to get some product on that spot or some water. You bring it back, now you're 107.
That's a business decision.
So it's the purpose of the flight. If the purpose of the flight isn't purely hobby or recreational, you are Part 107 civil. So it doesn't matter if somebody's paying you to do it, but if you go up and you fly a UAS mission because somebody wants something from that mission, it's commercial, civil. Yeah, I'll get to it right behind you first. It's all done with their database of no-fly, I don't know, smoke and mirrors, who knows? I don't know. But somehow they make sure that you're not going to carry a dirty bomb into downtown Minneapolis.
With the TSA, I don't know if I missed it. How long does the background check take normally?
No idea. They're shooting for 2 weeks.
Okay. But with that, if everybody's filing it, could slow it down, or who knows?
They
Yeah.
probably use the TSA pre-check for that.
Yeah.
Same thing. You get a pre-check for flights.
It's
to
not
do that.
pre-check.
Yeah, it won't. If you have TSA pre-check, that's not going to green light you through the process.
That's,
No, it's a separate deal. It may speed up the process, but they're not going to be like, oh, he's pre-checked, let him go. If you're not a Part 61 pilot, you'll still have to go through their process. I know I hand back here. Yes, sir.
Is educational treated differently than hobby versus civil?
Yes, education's a little bit differently. We issued a policy letter on that about a month ago. And it really allows for civil type UAS operations under an educational umbrella where you're not going to need to be a pilot, and you're not going to have to go through the knowledge exams and things like that. But there are some restrictions on what we consider educational. So on our website, I believe it's one of the FAQs. If not, I think it's listed on the news thing because that was a big deal. We had a legal interpretation come out regarding educational use because a lot of STEM schools now are investing in UAS, rightfully so, in demonstrating that, getting their kids interested in doing that type of operation. So we had to come out with something. And that education, it's out there. It's a legal interpret. It's on our website.
First week of May it came out.
First week,
AUVSI
okay.
conference.
Okay, yep. So it's out there, and it's a pretty good interpretation. It'll clearly tell you what you can and cannot do and still be considered educational. Contracting somebody right now, I would ask to see their 333 exemption. That's the only way you can operate commercially right now. All this Part 107 stuff we went through doesn't live until August 29th.
And their pilot certificate.
And their pilot certificate.
No, not required.
So it won't. The exemption will state that they have to have a pilot certificate, but they need to provide that, show you that certificate. After August 29th, they're going to need to have a remote pilot certificate if they're not operating under the exemption. So let me try to clear this up because I've just mentioned a lot of goofy things. The way the FAA met Congress's mandate to allow commercial UAS operations before the rule came out was through the exemption process. Essentially, we exempted you from a whole bunch of rules that didn't make sense for small UAS operation, so you could operate civilly. That process took forever, and we'll be backlogged until the end of time right now through that process. Anybody still waiting on an exemption? Yeah, forget it. And I don't mean that in a rude way. It's just one, yeah, okay. So the exemption 333, or 333 exemption, whatever you want to call it, was a methodology to allow somebody to operate commercially. It placed conditions and limitations on that exemption. You may, you may not, you may, you must, you shall not. One of them was you have to have a pilot certificate. So people got this exemption and went, I'm going to go operate commercially, and they read that and I'm like, wait, I got to drop $7,000 on a pilot certificate to do this? That's ridiculous. And it kind of was. But at that time, we had no way to ensure that somebody flying a UAS understood what those questions were that I asked all you guys. And that was our cheap way of doing it. We needed to get it out fast. Now with Part 107 coming out, that's going to go away. It'll still be there if you want your exemption, but it's probably not going to happen before you can get your remote pilot certificate and start flying under 107. And Part 107 is far more permissive than any of the exemptions were to begin with. And that's kind of the evolution of the rule as we go along. So did I answer the question? Is that, okay, yeah. The benefit to having a 333 now would be that if your 333 allowed you to do something that Part 107 will not. Maybe through a COA that's attached, your certificate of authorization that's attached to the 333. Other than that, boy, the restrictions on Part 107 are far less, and it's way easier to operate on that.
Okay, that's what we when I was done at AUVSI.
Based on 333s, if you have them now or if you're waiting for them, they will still come if you're waiting for them, just not very quickly. When Part 107 was published but not yet effective, they reorganized the priority for processing 333s. So now the 333s they're working on are the ones that don't fit into Part 107. Very unique, individualized type 333 exemptions. They'll take care of those and then they'll get to the other ones.
And they're closing all the ones that fall under 107, as I understand.
Though they didn't close them, they stuck them all at the bottom, as in we may never get to them. If you do get to the three, well, and here's the, yeah. Did I give you the government answer on that? And here's the thing with the 333. If you just requested a standard UAS 333, you're going to get it, and it'll be so restrictive it's ridiculous for you to use and not fly into Part 107. It will not give you anything extra. In fact, it'll just constrain you significantly for that. So the 333s that are run-of-the-mill or I just want to operate commercially, you might as well just give up on it because come August 29th, when you get your remote pilot certificate, you're going to have much more freedom under that rule than you will the other one. But if you do have both, you have to pick. You either operate under the 333 or Part 107, not both. You can't say, well, I have a 333 with my certificate of authorization, and it allows me to do this in downtown Minneapolis, but I don't have a pilot certificate. I got a remote pilot certificate, so I'm going to use that part of 107. No, it doesn't work. You are either 107 or 333. You have to pick one or the other. They're still both valid, but you can't, cherry pick out of both and make your own awesome operation. Yes, sir. The reason I asked, because the last I heard, we were developing a UAS-specific waiver form. The waiver form that we have right now is geared toward banner tow operations and air shows, and it doesn't really fit UAS.
I'll just swing into the FISBO.
You can still get an N number if you want for your UAS. We're requesting that unless absolutely necessary, you don't. Now originally, 333 holders, you have an N number probably, right? I think I've spoken to both of you back. Those N numbers obviously are still valid. We quickly realized that with over 500,000 UAS registrations, we're going to run out of N numbers. And so that's why we went to the 7-digit number or whatever it happens to be. But if you still need an N number, you may still get an N number. You can request that through the paper form, into the FSDO, fill it out, and they'll give you an N number. But if you don't need it, please don't, because we'll run out.
Understood.
Yeah.
107 isn't one of the changes that states and municipalities can now have laws for UAS, like banning them from certain areas?
No. So, okay, so the question is, can states ban a UAS from a particular area? And here's how this works. States cannot make rules, and I forget the fancy FAA government term, the federal term, but states cannot make rules, preemption, thank you, that trump federal rules. So the FAA says you can do it. There's not a state law that can come out and says, no, you can't. Now, here's where they can. They can say, we don't want UASs flying over Lake Calhoun parks or state capital. They can make a rule that says UASs are not allowed to launch from anywhere within the city boundaries, the city proper. Okay, so downtown St. Paul or whatever they happen, they can draw a boundary and say, you can't launch it. Now we all know you can't fly a UAS beyond visual line of sight under Part 107, right? So there's a good chance you'll never be able to get into that air. So they can sort of stop you from flying over an area, but they have to do it with rules that apply to where you are launching from. They can't say this airspace is cut off. We don't allow UAS in this airspace because they don't control the airspace. 1 foot, 100,000 feet, it all belongs to the FAA. So they can't make rules to preempt that airspace at all. They can make rules that say you may not land or take off a UAS from, which is pretty restrictive. Most UASs operate 20 minutes on battery charge, maybe 25 as they get better. But yeah, they can restrict it, but not in the way that many people think they can.
So law enforcement would have to see the vehicle take off in order to enforce the thing?
Or just watch it land.
But you're saying the government can say you can't take off or land? So
Sure.
it lands, you're violating the law?
Sure. Yeah, because they control the ground, right? They own the ground, they own the land underneath it. So, and you will probably see rules written as no person may take off or land a UAS within Brooklyn Park city limits for commercial operation. Without approval or something like that. Now, hopefully they understand the hobby aspect of it, so they don't create that problem. But they could say that. So a cop doesn't see you take off, but somebody calls it, this thing's hovering out my window. The squad shows up and then you land somewhere and it's not private property, then yeah, they can take state action, not FAA. Not to go too far down this rabbit hole because I'm not a state local guy. I know, well, I thought I knew Part 107 a lot, thanks for the visual observer comment, guys. But I don't know state and local laws. And quite frankly, I'm not sure how many are on the books right now. I did testify in front of the state legislature about 2 years ago to talk about UAS, and they're very interested in privacy for the individual, obviously, and they're also very interested in law enforcement capability. What can law enforcement do with the UAS without some sort of court order? So that seemed to be what it was focused on.
I would argue that they do so in Edina where I live.
They would say no commercial if they were really, and let the hobbyists go, because there's a lot of things you can't do as a hobbyist that you can commercially. Yes, sir.
Kevin, I had read that there was a ruling passed on it.
Yeah, so when we talk about airspace, the FAA talks about airspace from the surface on up, not 83 feet or anything like that. And nobody has challenged that and been successful through that. So, take away this. If it comes up off the ground, it's subject to FAA.
Kevin, there's a Chicago case that we talked about a couple times. So I haven't heard anything about it. Have you heard anything about how that has kind of worked its way through the system?
No, it takes a while, especially with that large of fine. Skypan, I don't know a whole lot about the case, but based on what I know of conducting, I've been witnesses before and I've been in court, and I've done my own enforcement cases. to hit $1.9 million for a fine, you really have to be thumbing your nose at the FAA quite a bit. If we catch you and you're flying an illegal UAS operation, you'll probably get a letter from us being like, hey, please stop. So somehow you go from that letter saying, knock it off, to $1.9 million. And they were operating, I know they were operating in Chicago and New York, high density traffic areas. And I got to imagine the FAA sent many please stops, and they, no, we're going to keep going. So then what the FAA does, they look back and they go, all right, there's a $10,000 fine for every flight you did, and you did however many flights over the last 4 years since we told you to stop. And they add it up, and then it comes out to 1.9. We make an announcement, then the lawyers get involved, and then they argue, which I think they're doing now, and they'll probably whittle down to something, I don't know. But when people are like, well, how much could the fine be? A lot. A lot.
And each time you take off.
Every event. And that's, yeah, it's usually not a $1.9 million fine for doing commercial operations. It's like $10,000 fine for each operation, and you had, 500,000 operations or whatever.
There's one more question, and we'll take a break.
Okay, please educate. We have, I think, nationwide, 3,000 FAA inspectors like myself. Of those 3,000, 50 are dedicated to UAS specialists outside of Washington, D.C. We have a group in Washington, D.C. that's very good. At least I think they're very good at what they do. Outside that, we have about 50 people. And it takes me a long time talking to a group of 20, 30 people to reach everyone. And the same thing goes with manned pilot aircraft. I hold safety seminars all the time, but the people show up aren't the people I really need to be preaching to. You guys want to do it right. In terms of educating, you guys aren't the people I need to be speaking to. I need to have a room full of my dad in here and talking to him, get him to understand it. Because those are the guys who are going to ruin it for you. We talked about no difference between model and in terms of the media and the public view. That's the problem. So if you can educate them, however you want to do it, download a couple things from our website, download that advisory circular, or know before you fly posters are pretty good. I think they're just one-page little thing. And I say I operate. I'm part of AUVSI, or I'm part of NAV Meetup or whatever. Here's some information. Please review it, because you could get into a lot of trouble doing this stuff. If it rises to the occasion where this is a serious safety concern, call the FAA, call us, let us know. It's very difficult for us to track people down and catch them in the act, because we have to catch you in the act of flying your UAS. I can't scour YouTube and be like, this guy's been doing this, forever. I'm not going to mention any names, Jones Star up in Duluth, but there are groups out there that have been doing this for a while that shouldn't be doing it, and it's very difficult. The burden is upon us to show that we see them doing it in the act. And YouTube videos can be used as supplementary information in a court case, but not as our primary I gotcha. And it's, as you guys know, we chase shadows. Somebody complained about a UAS operating by a department in Richfield about 2 weeks ago. There's no way I can get out of my office by the airport, into a car, drive through crosstown traffic to sort of where I think it was, before that thing's down and in the trunk and gone. It's chasing shadows. It's very difficult for us. Not even to mention the fact we don't have the resources to do it anyway. It's tough, but educate as much as you can. Use that stuff online, print out our flyers, our brochures, let people know.
I would say it's a
Applause, and you would say that.
I will stick around after the break if you guys have more questions. Like I said, all afternoon, and you guys pay my salary, so.
I think we saved you a piece of pizza, so.
Yeah, thanks.